this week on the Deep Leadership Podcast.
And I think that the summation of all that is, your relationship with somebody else boils down to one thing. It's how do you make them feel about themselves?
This episode is brought to you by the Salty Sailor Coffee Company, the official coffee of the Deep Leadership Podcast. Salty Sailor is a veteran-owned coffee brand on a mission to deliver premium, fresh roasted coffee while making a positive impact in the world. Their motto is drink coffee and do good, which reflects their commitment to making amazing coffee and actively supporting the military community. 10% of every order goes to the Navy Marine Corps Relief Society, an organization dedicated to helping sailors, Marines, and their families in times of need. All our listeners get 10% off every order of their amazing coffee by using the discount code DEEP at checkout. So check them out at saltysailorcoffee.com. Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Brent Kedzierski. Brent is a leading voice in the evolution of work with a focus on improving the human condition. His role at Hexagon, a global leader in industrial digital solutions, puts him at the confluence of digital transformation, Industry 4.0, and connected worker ecosystems. With a career spanning over 35 years, including a pivotal role at Shell as head of learning strategy and innovation, Brent brings a unique perspective on optimizing human performance and worker engagement in the digital age. And I'm excited to have him on the show to dive into the world of human-centered work. So, Brent, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. Good to be here.
It is great to meet you. And we've had some discussions before we press record. And so it's kind of interesting, the topic we're going to talk about. Before we dive into the subject, tell us what you do at Hexagon and what Hexagon does as a company.
Well, it's interesting. I kind of worked my way backwards into Hexagon. I didn't plan on joining them, but I'll tell you, I had a career where I started my career right out of college in DC, working with a lot of government agencies and things like that. And then I eventually kind of whittled my way down to Shell, where I spent, 20 plus years working in progressively, more global impact roles, and ended with the role being head of learning strategy and innovation. And in that work, I had a lot of opportunity to look at the human potential in Shell. I mean, we always had around 100,000 employees. And, I dealt with the full spectrum of vendors and vendor solutions. And I was always on boards and committees to select vendors. And I was always charged with transforming some major human capacity capability within Shell. And I always struggled because, you had vendors that told you, what they wanted to tell you. They didn't tell you what they didn't want to tell you. They'd say, oh, this is a beautiful slide and look at all these pretty graphs and bar charts you're going to get. And they're all in color. And then you'd spend $500,000 or $2 million on the solution. And you'd say, where's my bar charts? And they say, oh, well, you didn't enable that functionality. That was just part of the presentation. So, I mean, I had dealt with all the biggest vendors in the globe. And so I always kind of had a thing to say, boy, if vendors and companies like Shell and Exxon and Chevron could really work together better to synergize and to really, advance the world together and advance their industries together, that would be great. So when I left Shell, I was doing some consulting with companies, and it was great. I mean, they're all Fortune 50 companies, but I was feeling that I was really getting bogged down in their quagmire of how slow they were moving. And I was trying to say, how do I, exponentially, increase my value? How do I get my experience and my message out there all these years that I did all these complex challenges? And so I started work on Hexagon. And Hexagon, was building their connected worker ecosystem. And I jumped in right at that time to say, boy, if I can really help them build their connected worker ecosystem, given all my previous history and especially my work in doing these kind of things in Shell, that could really be a thing of like giving back to industry and in directing or help direct the vendor to give, operators, owners like I was at Shell, real relevant, distinctive, valuable solutions. So what I do at Shell, or not at Shell, but Hexagon now, is I help them inject human-centered design principles into all their connected worker solutions. So that's kind of what I wanted to do. And so they've given me a bigger platform that I had when I was kind of, in between Shell and Hexagon, just working as kind of a independent consultant for, one or two companies at a time.
That makes a lot of sense. But take us through what a connected worker ecosystem is for those who might not be familiar with that terminology.
Ah, that's a good question because I'm actually writing a series of blog articles for Oil and Gas IQ, and it's all about talking about what is a connected worker ecosystem. So, obviously it's there to, use these concepts of digital transformation, which, digital transformation is all about kind of, improving a company's big business processes, its big customer solutions. But then you have this thing called um, Industry 4.0. So it is the new era of manufacturing, and it's all about revolutionizing manufacturing with smart technology. So give them data-driven insights, optimize their production processes and things like that. And that's right now, honestly, that's over $50 billion a year in 2023. And again, digital transformation was well over $2 trillion in 23. But then once you have this big kind of umbrella of digital transformation, and then industry works within this concept called, cyber physical connectivity in industry 4. But then you use those technologies, which really the connected worker is about enhancing the frontline worker experience and impact. It's about creating a new era of work experience for today's industrial workers. And, industry means all industries, whether it's retail, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's construction, whatever it might be. But it's this thing that as automation increases, right now about 30% of the jobs are automated. Now, this goes from anything from, frying a hamburger to, basic things. But what we've got to do is these automation solutions increase. We've got to have humans work better with humans and humans work better with other machines. So there's a lot of things like that, but essentially connected worker is about, using these connected technologies to give people real-time access to information, insights, training, colleagues, feedback, anything that's in the world, the wheel of the work cycle.
Hmm. That makes sense. It's interesting because I think what you're and the work that you're adding to it is to make it more human centric, right? And one of the things that I've seen, maybe evolve over the last maybe 10 years is that we see a lot of worker frustration, we see disengagement, we see disenchantment from employees. And I sense that the workplace is less human centric and not more human centric. How where do you see the disconnect, and how can these systems help kind of bridge that gap that I think is missing between employees being deeply engaged in what they're doing and and meeting and enjoying what they do, and also doing it in a way with this digital shift that's happening?
Right. So yeah, it's a great question because I love the topic, and what I call this is the anatomy of work. So just like, you've got the board game with the tweezers, operation, you think about work as that as well. You've got all these organs and bones and things, and you're trying to get in there to, not break anything, not break yourself, and get things done. And if you think about the anatomy of work and you think about the connected worker concept, they marry together. So connected workers all about giving workers better connectivity, better information flow, and better access to information, whether that be, mobile accessibility anytime, anywhere, any device. And it's all about digital transformation and digital integration. meaning that you put digital into the workflows. And again, there's a work cycle about when does the task start? So what's the queuing? How can technology help alert workers to when they need to do something or prepare them? And then there's this whole thing in work about continuous learning, getting knowledge, sharing knowledge, managing the knowledge you have. Um, and this whole aspect that we've never really dealt with in work, because work historically, whether it's from Frederick Taylor in 1910 to Henry Ford in the 1920s, to the war productivity efforts in the 1940s, to all this kind of newer age management in the 1950s to 70s. Work has always been about productivity and quality. It's not until recently that we've thought of work about, as a means to kind of make people happier and enriched and get them engaged. And this is where this whole idea of human-centered construction has been in play. So it's all about, do we build workflows and do we build jobs with like understanding and empathy? Do we incorporate collaboration and engagement? Do we have kind of iterative processes where people can kind of learn and build on their knowledge and can, they adapt? So it's a lot about those kind of things. And the connected worker with all these new technologies enables a better anatomy of work. So again, if you look at worker frustrations, everybody talks about the 4-hour work day or the 4-day work week. And they're right. Half of our time at work is spent talking about doing work. So there's research that says 60% of the time you spend at work is spent on talking about doing the work. Then you've got about 30% of your time doing administrative things, listening to corporate meetings, listening to, compliance training, doing all these things. Then you get interrupted every 7 minutes. So by the time you think about your work day, you're really not very productive. That disengages you. You've got lousy decision-making processes, so they're delayed, they're stalled. You don't get the input that you think you should have. Processes are inefficient. And all this is going on, these old bad work anatomy elements against a new backdrop of Gen Z with new expectations, the COVID pandemic that was a catalyst for changing people's expectations and wants and needs about their work. So you've kind of got this tsunami of all these things going on, and leaders are definitely, and I say definitely because, yeah, there's some outliers out there that are doing some good things, but I work with big, major Fortune 50, 100 companies, and they're not doing it. They're not embedding human centricity in their work practices. It's at best surface level initiatives that are done for flag waving appearances, but not authentically, tagged to say, are our workers actually feeling better about the time they invest with us? So I'll pause there.
Yeah, and that's a really good, interesting point, because I was going to bring up, my corporate career, which spanned 22 years, is, we implemented multiple different systems and technologies over the years. And it always seemed like it was, I always used to say that we seem to be here to feed the systems, and the systems aren't here to help us, right? So it seemed like every one of these systems we created over the years was just extra work that people had to do, right? It was some sort of maybe a sales reporting system or ERP system that was more difficult than the one we had before that. And we spent all our time feeding the beast, which was the system, right? And so we lost productivity usually when a lot of these technologies came out. And again, what I saw a lot of was this flag waving, like you talked about, or flag wagging, where they just they got some system in, they have a big, press release, and the head guys celebrate, and then the rest of the workers were now burdened with an extra tool that doesn't work. It's not human centric, and it leads to more frustration than we had before. I remember my last ERP change before I finally left corporate for good. There was a decision made to put in SAP in a plain vanilla form and not customize it because they wanted to put it in fast all across the world. And so I had an amazing ERP system. I was running a business at the time, and I knew exactly what was happening with my business. When the new system came in, I lost all visibility of my business and what was happening. And so I was lost. My data systems were terrible after that point. But again, it was a big celebration by my company when they implemented SAP. And so how do we get that? I mean, how does Hexagon, how do you get the attention of upper management to say, you got to make it human centric? How does that happen?
Well, I think if you look at some of the statistics, I mean, it amazes me because these statistics are out there and they should smack leaders in the face. I mean, and they're not doing anything about these things. I mean, you
Mm.
go out there and you can go and look at any, Gartner survey or McKinsey or whatever it might be. It's going to tell you that, 70, 85% of all digital transformation investments don't deliver results or considered failures. They can tell you that 80% of workers are disengaged. They can tell you that, work produces, 75% of the primary care physician visits to, doctors on, because of work-related stress. The medical community can tell you that, job-related stress is like the fourth leading killer of Americans. It's because job-related stress, induces bad behaviors, drinking, drug abuse, lack of activity and exercise, lack of sleeping, and it results in high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, obesity, all these kind of mental health issues as well. So, I mean, the statistics are out there and they're crazy. I mean, and they're getting worse. I think the global work satisfaction will do a survey, and it was down again this year, another percentage. So, people are out there, they're not happy in their work. Now, with that said, that backdrop, companies will go with, baseball, American flag, and apple pie, where they say, we're going to improve corporate productivity and we're going to prevent or we're going to improve safety. But they look at it from a traditional 1950s, 1940s perspective. So they look at productivity as kind of, the input versus output, ratio. And what they're not understanding is, to prevent accidents or to optimize, workers' contribution in terms of higher cognitive activities, better collaborative activities, or more creative activities, they've got to improve the workflows so they're more human centric. The old thinking was we're going to optimize the workflow because we're going to reduce delays and we're going to reduce redundancy and we're going to reduce, they were all anti-human things. They were all things that were in the static kind of dead process. Okay, we're going to, we're going to create the things that humans don't have any control over. And so, they weren't thinking about these things. But now when you look at human centricity, you're looking at how do you improve worker engagement? How do you enable better collaboration, better decision making for humans? So how do you, because humans don't do a lot in terms of like work stuff. Every human, whether you work at TJ Maxx or you work at ConocoPhillips or you work at Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, you basically execute a task, and there's some things around with that. You have the right data, where you're given the right instructions, blah blah. Are you given good feedback and everything? And do you know the expectations? And then you kind of start doing it, but then you might run into problems. So you got to troubleshoot, you got to problem solve, you got to make decisions. And then either you have to escalate or you have to figure, well, I manage this better myself. And then you close the task and you document or tell somebody, hey, I learned something. I don't care where you work, you're going to go through that same cycle. And industry and leaders and companies don't take that simple structure and say, how do we help our workers execute their tasks, make sure they're ready and prepared to execute, make sure they're well informed, make sure they're given the right tools and resources and properly motivated. How do we help them make decisions and problem solve and troubleshoot? And then how do we help them determine when to escalate or not escalate? And how do we help them, finish the task and then learn from it, not only for company perspective, right? But more and more today, it's important they learn from their perspective because they want to be not only valuable to the company, but they want to be employable because everybody knows today you're not going to be at Conoco or Phillips, ConocoPhillips or Chevron for 30 years. You're going to be, the Gen Z is going to be at 7 companies by the time they're 30.
Yeah, I mean that's what's interesting is that I think the workforce is changing. And you mentioned something that I think is interesting. Gen Z has a different perspective on what work is compared to like Gen X and the Boomer generation, right? And the pandemic certainly made us aware that workers decided, you know what, this is an opportunity for me to change and do something that I actually enjoy instead of just this, drudgery of whatever work I was doing prior to the pandemic. And they found things like working from home. Like we did it as we did it as a necessity. And many employees said, hey, I like this. I like not having a hour commute back and forth to work. So they're looking for jobs that are remote or hybrid or what have you. So, given that all that data that we've seen a shift in the way people are, where do you see the future of work? How do we deal with, we have a real need in companies for increased productivity and performance from people, the people in the organization, and then we have a shifting mindset within the workforce in terms of what their expectations are as to what a job is. So where do you see the future of work with these two seemingly big things colliding, I think, and technology being right in the center of it?
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on. I just saw something on LinkedIn or YouTube or something, and it was about this worker, this young Gen Zer had a fantastic, great job in a high-profile company, high-profile position, and they basically said, you know what? That's really not what I wanted to do.
Hmm.
That was in the traditional mindset. Because remember, the traditional mindset was, you went to high school, you tried to get into the best possible college you could get into, you'd consume yourself in student loan debt, and then you'd leave after 4 years with, a couple $100,000 in debt. Now, these Gen Z are saying, I don't need that. I don't buy into that traditional mental model. So I would rather go to a school that I can afford, or maybe gives me a scholarship and I don't leave with debt, or maybe I'll even just be a tradesperson because I'm going to make just about as much money and I'm not saddled with the debt. And I have more flexibility. Maybe I've got my own little kind of, startup within the company. So I'm seeing a lot of the younger generation saying, I don't buy into the traditional mental model. I don't buy into, work-life balance, meaning I have to balance the consumption and the drag of all the work I've got to do with and try to fit my life in that. And, I'm not, living to work, I'm working to live. And I want my holiday, I want my paid time off, I want to use my vacation, and all those things are very different from the Gen Xers or the Boomers. The Boomers and Gen Xers would never speak up to their leaders and say I disagree. The Gen Xers or the Gen Zers do. They'd never say, "Well, I'm not going to work this weekend," or "I'm not going to cancel my vacation." I mean, it's funny because they're going to be teaching in history classes in schools in a couple of years. Remember the days when, your grandparents would cancel their family vacation because work wanted them to stay and work. And it's going to be insane to these younger generations to even fathom that grandfather would, cancel the vacation at Disney World that they planned for 5 months because the manager, their leader said, I need you to do this. And if you don't, there's going to be a consequence.
Yeah.
So we've got to change, what the role that leaders have and this ridiculous power structure that companies have, and it's got to shift to a collaboration structure because workers are adults, are not children. It's not pedagogical kind of, parent-child relationship, and all that's going to change. So the connected worker tools like at Hexagon that I work with, I'm always trying to make them so they enrich the worker experience, so they make workers smarter in terms of applying their cognitive skills, their creative skills, and their collaborative skills, because those are the new power skills of the new millennia here. And I'm trying to get them to be, human-centered in terms of improving the quality of the work experience. So, again, I get so frustrated with companies, and whether it's I'm talking to them about, maybe you want to go to a 4-day work week, or maybe I talked to one company, they had a great work structure. They had people come in, different schedules, but you come in to work on Monday and you work till Thursday. Then you're off Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, 4 days off. And then you came into work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Then you had a 2-day weekend. And that little change, it's changed people's whole perception of their life, that they get a 4-day weekend every week. So they're planning trips with their family. They're more immersed in their own life. And again, I believe that organizations have a big role. Instead of producing mental health issues and bad physical health issues, they've got to be creating strong individuals that in turn create strong families, that in turn create strong communities, which in turn create stronger societies. And I think that's the big shift that we've got to go through as leaders, and saying, look, work is more important than just your industry and your competitiveness, and it's more important as well as the environment, because we're still trying to get all these things sorted out. So we got to produce oil and gas or paper or whatever, or textiles. We got to do it in a safe way. We got to do it in an environmentally friendly way, but we've also got to do it a way that's human and it's centric, so that a byproduct of our productivity isn't a bunch of sick people.
Hmm.
So, I mean, that's kind of what I'd say to that.
Well, amen is what I'll say to you, because that's what we need. And that's why we have this podcast too, is we're trying to remind people that at the end of the day, we want to have strong workers. We want to have happy workers. We want to have engaged workers, because that leads to, like you said, engaged, better families, better communities, and a better world. And that's definitely we need more of. So my hat's off to you and the work that you're doing at Hexagon to get that message out to corporate leaders, to recognize that at the end of the day, there's a human involved in this chain that's really important. So I love that you're focused in on this issue, because it's such a powerful issue. Just what final message would you like to leave with our listeners about this topic we've been talking about today?
Well, I think that when I talk about human centricity, and I used to do a lot of leadership development at Shell and a lot of coaching of middle managers and things like that. And I think that people forget to take a look at themselves and seeing how they're helping others and helping themselves. And if you look at a human being, they're really comprised of six things. They're comprised of and I'm basically, dumbing it down a bit, but they're comprised of the skills that they have, what they can do well. And they're comprised of their knowledge that they have. So what do they know? What can they share? What can they apply? And then they're basically their traits. So are they trustworthy? Are they reliable? What do people think of them when they, reflect on who that person is? And then they have to look at their motivation. What motivates them to do this or do that? And then they look at their kind of their self-image. So do they have a good, strong self-image, or is it helping them or is it hurting them? And then what is the social role they're playing within their tribe, their working group? Are they the helper? Are they the referee? Are they the advocate? What role are they playing? And and it's those kind of things. So when you look at those things, and I always tell, for example, my son, your personal brand is built off those things. So people like you or dislike you, and your likability is basically judged on how do you motivate other people? So do they do they look at you and say, geez, John really motivates me, or John helps me expand my knowledge, or John helps me develop my skills, or John helps me develop my self-image, or John helps me, improve my social role in whatever, group or work group that I'm in. So I think that, I'd leave your listeners with that message that you should really understand those 6 factors about yourself and where you're strong and where, what makes you distinctive and relevant to other people. And then are you actively sharing those gifts with other people on a regular basis so you increase your likability and your impact on other people? So again, that's kind of what I'd leave them with. And I call that kind of, human-centric branding or competence-based branding.
I love it. It's such a great message. Yeah, we are, we have to manage our personal brand all the time. I talk about this with career advice for young people is that no one's going to manage your career and you have to manage your personal brand. And especially these days, you might work at 7 different companies before you're 30. So you have to manage your brand, your personal brand in a very effective way. And those 6 factors you mentioned are a great way to do it. If you're in a leadership position, work on those and help other people improve those areas in their life too. That's a great way to be a leader. It's a great way to build a personal brand.
Yeah. And I think that the summation of all that is, your relationship with somebody else boils down to one thing. It's how do you make them feel about themselves? And again, if they feel that they're learning and growing and enhancing themselves by knowing you, by being in a relationship with you, they're expanding their network, they're expanding their knowledge, either expanding or building up their own self-image and courage or whatever trait they might want to, build up, they're going to, have an affinity towards you. And, that's really what the world needs. I mean, if everybody kind of said, look, I'm going to try to give you and present the best of who I am to you, and I'm going to try to give the best of who I am to you so we can make the best of you, we'd all be in a lot better space.
Agreed, 100%. So we agree with that message for sure. Well, this has been fantastic, Brent. How can our listeners find out more about you and the work you do?
Well, again, I do a lot of the blogging for Hexagon, so they'll put a lot of the blogs out on LinkedIn, and I do a lot of writing of articles on the human-centric space for groups like Oil and Gas IQ and other publications and things like that. But I tell you, it's really an important era because we are moving into this what we call high touch high concept era where everybody's expectations around their products and their solutions and their services are heightened. So again, I'm preparing for a hurricane here and I'm looking at all my toys and I got a flashlight, that's a radio, that's a compass, that's a CB radio, it's 9 different things. So this is what consumers expect, these multi-purpose gadgets or these customized, personalized solutions. Like I can get a pair of pants that's fit to me based on AI and things like that. So companies really need to step up and get their head in the game and quit trying to just cover their behinds and figure out what's the real thing that's going to add to their sustainability, longer term value, but most importantly, their own personal legacy.
It makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Well, Brent, I appreciate you coming on the show. I appreciate you bringing the awareness of this topic up to our audience. And again, listeners, you're thinking about different systems you're putting in place. Maybe you're thinking about how you're going to use AI. Maybe you're putting in some, connected worker ecosystem, as we talked about. You can't forget about the human element. And that's the power of this discussion we have with Brent today, is that we have to make our systems, we have to make our companies more human-centric. So, Brent, I want to thank you for coming on the show and thank you for making us aware of this really important issue.
Thanks, John. Good talking with you.
Great talking with you as well. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.